So, how does a religion founded on the idea of love your enemies end up waging holy war? Today, we're going to unpack one of history's most startling transformations, Christianity's journey from a faith of martyrs to a faith of, well, warriors. And this isn't just some historical puzzle, you know? It's a question that really gets to the heart of how faith, power, and politics can collide, with consequences that are still echoing through our world today. All right, so we're going to explore this whole thing in 5 parts, kind of following the breadcrumbs that led from the Sermon on the Mount all the way to the battlefield. Okay, let's start at the very beginning, with the early church. For the first 300 years or so, its stance on violence was, believe it or not, completely uncompromising. Christians were simply forbidden to kill. You see, these early Christians took the words of Jesus literally. Turn the other cheek wasn't some nice metaphor, it was a direct command. And that's exactly why so many of them refused to join the Roman army. For them, the path to victory wasn't through killing their enemies, but through martyrdom, through dying for what they believed in. And early church leaders like Tertullian, they saw this as the ultimate statement on violence. Think about it. When Jesus stopped Peter from using his sword in the garden, he wasn't just stopping one guy. In Tertullian's view, he was symbolically disarming every soldier, for all time. This table right here, it basically captures the entire journey we're talking about. Look how the view on violence shifts from being totally forbidden to a regrettable necessity, and then, incredibly, to a meritorious act. And the soldier goes from being a potential sinner to a soldier of Christ, where killing becomes the act of penance. This is the roadmap for the whole story. So what happened? What was the big turning point? Well, it all started with the conversion of a single, very powerful man, a Roman emperor. Right. So when Emperor Constantine embraces Christianity, everything just flips on its head. Suddenly, a faith that was defined by its opposition to the Roman Empire is now at the very heart of it. A small, persecuted church doesn't need a foreign policy, right? But an imperial church, it sure does. Now Christians had to wrestle with things like borders, barbarians, and the ethics of war. And this is where St. Augustine comes in. He builds the first real theological bridge away from total pacifism. Now, he didn't celebrate war. He called it a tragic necessity. And this became what we know as just war theory. The idea that, yeah, you could use violence, but only as a last resort to defend the innocent. And even then, a soldier who killed in a just war still had to do penance for the sin of taking a human life. Okay, now we get to the most radical and, honestly, the most terrifying twist in this entire story. This is the moment when war goes from being a sin that you have to get forgiveness for into a holy act that actually earns you forgiveness. So, fast forward to the 11th century. Europe is full of this warrior class of knights, and these guys are terrified they're all going to hell for a lifetime of bloodshed. Then Pope Urban II comes along with this radical new idea. He offers them a plenary indulgence, basically a get-out-of-hell-free card, a complete forgiveness of all sins for anyone who goes to fight in a crusade. And in one speech, he completely rewired Christian theology. Violence wasn't the sin anymore. It was the penance. This created a brand new category, penitential warfare. All of a sudden, killing wasn't something you had to be forgiven for later. No, if you killed the right people, the so-called enemies of Christ, the act of killing itself was how you earned your salvation. It's a massive shift. And to really sell this, theologians like Bernard of Clairvaux developed this chilling new logic. He argued that killing a pagan wasn't homicide, the killing of a man, but malicide, the killing of evil itself. I mean, wow. This provided the ultimate justification. It dehumanized the enemy and it made the killer holy, all in one terrifying stroke. And this quote from Bernard, it just perfectly captures the completed transformation. In just a couple of sentences, you can see the whole journey from the Sermon on the Mount to a theology of righteous bloodshed, where killing for Christ becomes a holy and safe act. So once you create a theology that justifies killing your enemies, it's really only a matter of time before you start finding new enemies, right? This logic was turned outward to justify colonialism. And it was also turned inward to persecute anyone who was considered an other. The logic of the Crusades was basically exported to the quote-unquote New World through a series of papal decrees we now call the Doctrine of Discovery. These documents gave European monarchs the green light to invade, capture, and subjugate non-Christians, even allowing for perpetual slavery. They declared any land not inhabited by Christians as nobody's land. This wasn't just politics, it was the theological engine for centuries of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. And this holy war logic wasn't just for faraway places. It was used to launch crusades right inside Europe. During a massacre of supposed heretics in France, a papal legate was asked how they were supposed to tell the difference between the heretics and the true believers. His alleged response has become infamous. "Kill them all. God will know his own." The same righteous fury fueled centuries of internal purges. You have the Inquisition using torture to enforce theological purity. You have the witch hunts, which, backed by religious texts, led to the murder of tens of thousands of people, mostly women. And this same logic was weaponized against Jews and used to criminalize queer people, creating this legacy of persecution that has lasted for centuries. And here you can just see the profound contradiction, plain as day. The faith began with a founder who said, "My kingdom is not of this world," but it evolved into this institution that claimed a divine right to kill for earthly territory because it believed that it was the kingdom. Now, it's really tempting to look at all this and think, okay, that's ancient history. But the sources we're drawing from here argue that this theology of violence, it never actually disappeared. It just changed its clothes. This slide is really the crucial bridge. Look at the parallels between the ancient and modern forms of this righteous violence. A crusade to reclaim Holy Land becomes a special military operation that's justified as a holy war. The Inquisition's hunt for heretics becomes a legislative campaign to criminalize the existence of certain groups. The forms change, but the logic, it stays. And these patterns are still visible today. We see it in what's called legislative violence, where religious groups use their political power to pass laws targeting marginalized communities, like the anti-LGBTQ+ laws in Uganda. We see it in Christian nationalism, which mixes faith with violent political rhetoric. We see it in institutional cover-ups of sexual abuse, and even in how some people frame geopolitical conflicts as holy wars. So what's the thread connecting an 11th century crusader to these modern events? Well, the sources argue the common denominator is fear. The early church was powerless, persecuted, and fearless. But as the institution gained power, the fear of losing that power, the fear of losing influence, the fear of the other, that became the engine for its violence. And that leaves us with a final and pretty urgent question. If a terrified church is a violent church, what does that mean for our world today? Where do we see that fear? Fear of losing influence, fear of cultural change, fear of the other, shaping both religion and politics right now?